So, welcome everybody. We are with these two amazing people. We have Frank Lower and Susie Boss in this conference. Susie Boss will talk us about a little bit of education and leadership. But before that, I want to introduce you to Frank Lower and Susie Boss, a little bit of who they are. So Frank Lower is accredited and now co-teach the Harvard University Graduate School of Education course Learning Environment for Tomorrow, honored as a Planet of the Year by the Association for Learning Environment for his comprehensive planning approach, consumes building process, and state-of-the-art school design. Frank also guides clients to position their school for better learning through visions, school structure, development of school programs, and NH connection to the community. We have also Susie Boss, that is our speaker, and she is a writer and education consultant from Portland, Oregon, working to harness the power of teaching, learning, and storytelling to improve life and transform communities. Recent projects have taken her across the United States and around the globe to support schools in their process to change a traditional structure and engage students in a real-world problem solving. She have also have the privilege of working with education everywhere of the world, from India to Europe and also South America, in pivotal works, national focus, immigrant, and long-time contribute to Utopia. So Susie, I know you have a presentation, so you can start that. And in final, we will start with the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mariana. I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you all. It'll take me just a half a second here to... Okay, great. So let's just dig into our topic of preparing for the upcoming Congress, which I'm very excited to be part of this year, with the theme of Schools of Purpose. And what I'd like to talk with you about today is how you and your school system might be redefining student success, really with this eye toward developing schools of purpose. So I'm joining you, as Mariana said, from Portland, Oregon. Spring is approaching here. My last trip to Colombia was 2 years ago. And in fact, that was my last trip overseas, just as the pandemic was beginning and my global adventures came to a grinding halt. But I have spent a lot of time on Zoom and on various other platforms in the 2 years since then, which I'll tell you a little bit about, doing a lot of research about how schools are transforming teaching and learning to really set students up for success in this world we all find ourselves in. This photo is a farm not far from where I live, but if any of you have ever taken part in a project called the Journey North, you'll know why I'm sharing this picture of tulips. It's a wonderful example of project-based learning that connects people across countries and continents to understand about seasonal change. So, love the tulips. So what do we mean by redefining student success, and why is that important right now? You know, when I talk with teachers in all kinds of different contexts about how they're thinking about education, how they're talking with their students about what they need to know and be able to do to be ready for all the opportunities and challenges that might be ahead of them, a very familiar set of phrases tend to show up. They tend to talk about things like students being able to solve problems creatively, to be able to come together in collaborative groups, to be lifelong learners, because we know that information is not fixed. There's not just one set of facts that we need to know. Rather, we need to know how to continue learning as the world continues to evolve and information becomes, available to all of us. So just being able to think about problems, solve them, draw on what we know and what we need to know. Those are the sorts of qualities that teachers and school communities describe everywhere that I've been. They don't tend to focus on really great reading scores, really great math scores as the first thing that's most important for students. Those are sort of the metrics we've used in the past. So if we're going to redefine student success, we have to think about getting them ready for these challenges and opportunities ahead. And as we've seen very strongly during this pandemic time, challenges are complicated. The challenges our students have lived through, that we've all lived through in these past 2 years, show us how experts from across different disciplines have to come together to solve really wicked challenges, really tough problems that don't have one obvious solution. We need to collaborate from the medical side, from the public health side, from transportation and logistics chains, through our political systems. You know, that everything needs to come together. That means students need to be prepared for whatever challenges might be ahead of them in this project-based world that we find ourselves in. Problems don't stay in silos, and neither do solutions, and neither can our students if we want them to be really prepared for what's ahead. Some of the forces that are driving this new vision for education, this need to redefine teaching and learning, coming from lots of different sources. We have the need for students to be globally competent, to really be understanding their role as citizens in the world. As our expert from Harvard reminds us, that's not a luxury, but a necessity. Folks from outside of education, like Daniel Pink, who's written a lot about the need for creativity and creative thinkers. His book, A Whole New Mind, several years ago, launched many schools on really rethinking what education's all about. When we touched base with him recently, he said, you know, we need to remember that our students need this wide view. They can't be stuck in silos. They need a wide angle lens to understand the world. And Ted Dintersmith, another provocative voice in education, filmmaker and entrepreneur in various sectors, you know, he reminds us that by the time you finish high school, you need to have tackled some big challenges. That's going to give you the confidence that you need to move forward with a sense of purpose. And I think that aligns really well, you know, with the mission of this, the focus of the upcoming Congress. We're getting other pressures from all kinds of sources. College expectations are changing as colleges start to look beyond traditional test scores and look for kind of what do you know about this whole person who's applying to be a member of our college community? How do they demonstrate what they know and can do? Have they solved problems? Do they have a portfolio that helps us see them in a really well-rounded way? Those sorts of conversations are also happening and are forcing schools to think about, how do we help students kind of present their best case for who they are as a person and what they know and what they can actually do, what they can accomplish? How do they distinguish themselves when they want to take on their next challenge? So these are some of the questions that I've been wrestling with during these past couple of years. Co-author Ken Kay, who was one of the founders of the 21st Century Learning Movement 20 years ago now, he and I teamed up to work on a book that came out late last year. And during the months of research that we spent working on the book, I think we talked with something over 250 school leaders, teachers, students themselves, parents, and we talked with them about how do we really redefine student success? What are those competencies and skills that our students need to be prepared both for challenges and for opportunities? And a few big points came across really clearly in our interviews. One was, we can't wait for schools to change. This bold vision of where schools are going really needs to start now. The time has come. We can't keep talking about some future day when we're going to have 21st century learning. We're more than 20 years into this century, and it's time for this vision to really roll out to all of our students. And the vision that your school embraces has to be your whole community's vision. It can't just be coming from leadership or from your school board. It needs to be co-created with all the stakeholders in your community. That includes students themselves, includes parents, teachers, business partners, other allies, nonprofit organizations that really care about the future of young people. So in all kinds of different contexts, we heard how communities were coming together to shape this very specific vision. It might have things in common with lots of other communities, but there was often something unique to a particular place, something that each community really wanted to emphasize. as they prepare students for the future. And finally, I'm going to talk more about a phrase that came out of our research, green light culture. How do we set the stage for innovation and change? Over and over again, we heard teachers, school leaders, big thinkers in education talk about how it's important to set the stage for change by allowing for that to happen, creating what we have come to call a green light culture to foster innovation and bring good ideas to the fore. So how does this whole process work? The first step that we have found schools embracing, schools really on the leading edge of change. Those are the ones that we went looking for and whose smart brains we wanted to learn from. We found that creating a really bold vision needs to be anchored both in your community and in a sense of equity. So it's a vision that applies to all students across your system, not just for the very high achievers or the most extraordinary, but how are you shaping a vision that allows students to find room to show in different ways what they know, what they care about, what they can do, but that is helping all students prepare for the challenges that are ahead. So creating that bold vision is often called a portrait of a graduate or a portrait of a learner. Schools use lots of different terms to define this. But what's really critical, whether you're a new school just setting out and shaping your vision from the start, or whether you're a school that's been around for a while and you're really rethinking, are we on the right path to set our students up for success? Whether you're new or at this for a while, when you really take a hard look at that vision and come up with a very solid understanding of what do we want our students to know and be able to do by the time they graduate from our school system, that becomes your North Star. And everything that your school is doing, all the systems, all the instruction, all the assessment, all the teacher professional learning is aligned with that North Star. So you're moving all the pieces of your system in the same direction. We'll talk more about this green light culture and why that's really important in just a moment. But another tool that's just as important as this portrait of a student is a portrait of an educator. Who's the teacher? What's the profile of a teacher who's prepared to help students meet these new kinds of goals? And we found some schools, again, on the leading edge of change, really focusing on how do we help teachers themselves define their own goals and their growth opportunities as educators to help students get ready for new ways of thinking and engaging and solving problems in the world. One thing I'll add about this importance of vision is that it can't just be something that you do once and put on a really nice poster or put on your website or turn into a motto and figure, well, check the box, we've done that. This has to be a really living, organic process. And it has to go well beyond that, nice graphic or clever motto and really inform everything that you're doing. And you need to keep coming back to it and challenge yourself as a school system to think about how are we approaching our vision? How are we engaging students in becoming the capable young people that we want them to become so they're going to be ready for whatever's ahead? So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of a green light culture. And as I mentioned, this is not a phrase that we started with or that we asked schools to tell us about. It really emerged organically from our conversations. Over and over again, we would hear from teachers about remarkable projects they had done with students, and I'll share some examples of those in a moment. And we would ask them, how did you get started with this? How did you know you could do a project like this? And they would say things like, well, I knew my principal would give me the green light, or our superintendent gives us the green light, to learn in new ways or to take part in professional learning. This phrase came up over and over again, both from adults and from students. We'd talk with students about projects they had done. And again, I'll share some of those examples. And we'd say, how did you know that you could turn this question into a project with your classes? And they'd say, well, our teachers give us the green light for projects like this. So again, this phrase kind of emerged organically. We heard it enough times, and we went back over our interview notes and thought, boy, we're onto something here. Schools that are really leading toward transformation create this culture where people are able to try things and share the results. There's not an expectation of perfection. If what they're trying, what they're prototyping doesn't work, here's an opportunity to learn from it. You unpack failures if they happen. Reset. What can we learn from this? What can we take forward into our next attempt to really rethink teaching and learning? And we found a lot of curiosity among those educators who are leading toward new kinds of schools, new ways of teaching and learning. So they have that what we talked about earlier, that wide angle lens, that wide aperture. They're looking around the education landscape to find out, what are other schools doing? How can we borrow some ideas from other schools, sometimes from other sectors? How can we work with the partners in our community who also are invested in the future of our students? How can we learn from the way they go about their business and bring that into our project design? So these were some of the aspects of what we describe as a green light culture that we think is really critical for setting students up for success. And a key point about that again, some of our interviewees, superintendents and state leaders of education emphasized was, as a leader, you can't give a green light to everything. You want to create permission for innovation, experimentation, learning from failures, all of these things, but you want it to be for those things that are aligned with your vision. So you don't want just this scattershot, little something happened over here and something happened over there. You really want some alignment across your system so that teachers and students are innovating, but toward that vision, so that everything takes students closer to realizing and growing into that bold vision that you've set for your community. One of our big takeaways was that although the conversation starts with redefining success for your students, coming up with new understanding of what students need to know and be able to do by the time they graduate, you're also redefining success across your whole system. That means for leaders, that means for teachers, it means for everybody who's contributing to the education of your students. So these are some bold steps that have the power to kind of shake up old systems that are tied to perhaps outdated modes of thinking, and that starting on this process of redefining student success is probably going to have implications across your whole system. It's also going to have benefits across your whole system. And we heard some of these benefits during COVID. And I'll tell you that when we began our research, we had never heard of COVID. It hadn't happened yet. And talking about, what this book was going to be about and who we'd want to talk with. And as soon as we began our research process, COVID happened. And of course, every interview that we had, COVID became part of the conversation because it was such a schools everywhere had to figure out, how are we going to keep our students safe? How are we going to keep our schools open? How are we going to continue learning if we can't be together in the same place? What might that look like? And we found that in school systems that had really built a strong culture before COVID, they had a big advantage when faced with this big challenge of the pandemic. One school previous to COVID had adopted a motto that really synthesize their thinking about how they care about students from the whole child perspective. And their motto was "Go for every student." This motto came from a school leader who had been a coach. He'd been a volleyball coach. And in volleyball, there's a common strategy: go for every ball. Don't let anything get by your players. And he brought that kind of thinking, that kind of coaching mentality to school leadership. And their motto became, in our school, we're going to go for every student. No one's going to fall through the cracks. No one's needs are going to go unaddressed, because we really want to be equitable and help all our students prepare for success. So they shifted from really focusing on the needs of adults in the system to being very student-centered. And that had happened previous to the pandemic. During the pandemic, they were rapidly able to think about how do we meet the needs of every student. They came up with a really great system of having each teacher responsible for 30 students, whether they were in their own homerooms or not, checking in with them regularly to find out, what does a student need to be healthy and successful learning from home? What are the resources in our community that can fill the needs they might have? And how do we connect that student, each student, with whatever he or she needs to thrive? So they were able to do that during the pandemic. Another system talked with us about the factors that really enabled them to be agile and adjust on the fly, shift to blended learning and online learning. They knew how to collaborate because they'd been doing that as educators. They had a strong vision, so they had that North Star. They knew where they were going. And they had this kind of can-do culture. Again, their thinking was, we can do this. We're capable. We're not going to be thrown by, change or disasters that come our way because we know how to adapt. So we found real benefits to this green light culture as schools were going through and now emerging from the pandemic and trying to figure out how do we continue on our path of supporting students. So the most exciting part of this research for me, it's kind of the middle part of the book, where we take readers on just dozens of what we call field trips to see creative problem solving in action. Not what are schools going to be able to do someday with their students when they get to this new vision, but what are they doing today? We don't want to have to wait to get students on the path to transformation and to kind of recognizing their own capacity as problem solvers. This needs to start now. And so we wanted to demonstrate what students are doing, what they're accomplishing, and what sort of teacher support helps them on this path to becoming really creative problem solvers and tackling problems often in their communities and sometimes well beyond. And over again, the problems that students were most interested in tackling were not isolated in content silos. They weren't just an English problem or a math problem, social studies problem. They were really rich, interesting problems that needed to draw on multiple sources of information and different ways of thinking to come up with solutions. I'm going to talk about a few examples at different grade levels, but really broadly, some of the big contexts where we found great problem solving happening and deep thinking and deep understanding developing were in areas around invention and entrepreneurship, where students were coming up with new products and new solutions, creative problem solving, by really bringing the best of their innovative thinking to the fore. We saw lots of examples where students were active members of their communities, engaging as citizens. They weren't waiting to become citizens in some future date. They are engaging as citizens now. And throughout these examples, we found students growing into the skills of being more self-directed. Their teachers were helping them learn to manage their own time, to keep their motivation high, to be able to collaborate with others when necessary, but to really set goals for themselves and pursue those goals. So those are some of the ways that we found students really finding purpose through their education. And I'll share a few examples with you that I find pretty exciting. At the elementary level, I was really struck by a school system we encountered where students are really seen as the best problem solvers for the school system. This is strictly an elementary district, so it's K-6. And the superintendent shared with me her philosophy is that whatever problems we're encountering as a school system, we should turn to our students to help us solve them. There's no problem we can't tackle and come up with better solutions if we don't engage students. And they don't just throw students on their own to solve problems. They have some really great scaffolds to help students think about what questions do we want to ask? What interests us? How do we decide when a question is really worth exploring? And if we find something we want to explore, how do we dig into that? How do we do research? What does that look like? Who are our potential partners who can help us? Sometimes we need help from adults if we're elementary students trying to solve problems. So some of the things students have designed, you see a visual here that's their outdoor learning center that the entire district is able to use. So it's really designed in collaboration and with the leadership of students who thought about, here's a big unused space that the district happened to own. What could we put there? What could we build there that we could use over and over again throughout our education for really active learning? And it had to do with everything from agriculture and pollination to maker spaces and hands-on kind of design projects, all kind of on one outdoor campus with a lot of exciting things happening. And that, again, there's this equity piece. Every student across the system gets to take advantage of this learning space. And in smaller ways as well, on their own campuses, these students are regularly coming to school board meetings and presenting solutions for problems that they care about. One group of very young learners, primary grade learners, got concerned about the use of plastics in the cafeteria, and they wanted those out of the system. They did a lot of research with about alternatives, came up with a budget, came up with a plan, came up with a way to market their solution across their school campus. So students are continually finding ways to identify problems that are worth solving, getting support from adults as needed. This school happens to have what I think is a brilliant idea. They call it their digital human library, where they keep track of all the adults who are willing and able to help students answer really difficult questions about different areas of expertise. So kids know who they can turn to when they need help thinking about nutrition or engineering or all of the other issues that come up. So that's just at the elementary level. By middle school, some of the things that we saw students doing really had tremendous benefits for their communities. One school, I think these were sixth graders, who got concerned because their favorite lake in their favorite park was for some reason polluted and closed off to access. There was, caution tape all around their favorite place to go to take their dogs for a walk. The water was unsafe for humans and for other for pets and other animals. And the student brought this problem to the attention of his science teacher and said, I wasn't able to go to my favorite park this weekend because the lake's not safe. What can we do about this? And here's a case where the teacher had a green light to design a really challenging extended project with her collaborators, her fellow sixth grade teachers. So 200 kids took part in this citizen science project to investigate what are the sources of pollution. They worked alongside experts from the city water department to figure out what sort of tests do experts take. How can we take the same tests and compare our results, with the city experts? And then what can we do about this? What are potential solutions we can bring to the community? So I think this is a nice example of teachers having that green light to go with a great student question because they saw how to align it with their learning goals, with their standards that they needed to meet in science and in communication. And they had that ability to be flexible and to collaborate in planning the project, across their whole grade level. So what happens by high school if students are continuing to have a sense of agency and a voice and their questions really matter? So here's an example from my hometown, Portland, Oregon, in the US, where like students around the world, some students here were very concerned about climate issues. They felt like, adults have left us this big problem that they're not solving fast enough. This is our world. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be a healthy planet now and for the future. And students organized and literally marched to the school board and demanded a change. They wanted what they defined as climate justice, not just climate science, but climate justice. So why is it that certain populations with less privilege seem to live in places that have more pollution or worse air quality or poorer access to clean water? These were some of the issues that they wanted to explore along with the science related to climate science. As a result, and because this is a district that has adopted a new portrait of student success that really looks at students as active, engaged citizens and stewards of the world. That's part of their vision. And here were students saying, this is what we want. There's now in development a new curriculum K-12 that students are helping to develop that over time, as students, from the primary grades up through high school, learn more deeply about climate justice and are able to take action in the projects that they're doing. It's a good reminder of the quote you see at the top here from one of our education leaders in the US about the importance of educating students so that they're ready to take part in their country, in their democracy, whether that's a local level or at a national level, or perhaps contributing their voices to international issues. So those are just a few of the examples that we saw. And again, we found dozens of amazing examples, very provocative, exciting examples. If your students, if you're students yourselves, And if you're having experiences like this, if this is the kind of learning experience that you're getting to have now, it's really important to think about at the end of the project, did it make a difference? Reflection is a big part of the experience of project-based learning from start to finish. But I think it's really important to reflect at the end of a deep learning experience like the ones I've been describing. Did you make an impact? Did I make a difference in the problem that I really care about? These are some students I worked with a couple years back in India, focused on issues close to home. And they wanted to, the whole project was called Project Impact. They wanted to know, how can we make a difference on the issues that matter to us? These students cared about noise pollution. Others were concerned about traffic and safety. Others were focused more on things related to clean water. But each team wanted to think about not just did we learn a lot, but did we make a difference? And I think that's a question worth asking yourself. Some other questions that are really worth asking, and I think these can be questions that teachers can help students think about as kind of scaffolds for learning. If we want our students to get better at problem solving, they really need to think through, how does this problem affect people other than us? So there's that empathy piece. They need to be really great researchers. And again, they need teacher support and scaffolding to think about what information is reliable, how can experts help us? They're going to need your support from teachers on coming up with great ideas, building on each other's ideas, doing some brainstorming that really leads somewhere and that welcomes all voices in the brainstorming process. Critical thinking, again, is something that we have to really focus on scaffolding, supporting, and deepening in our students so that they don't just come up with great ideas, but they come up with the best ideas, the best possible solutions for the problems they're trying to solve. And of course, being able to communicate those ideas and convincing others to join in solutions is a big part of it. I already mentioned the power of reflection and how important that is. So just as important as student voice is in the kind of learning that I'm describing, teacher support, teacher scaffolding, intentional teaching of these sorts of skills and competencies and thinking abilities is really critical. So as you move towards student-centered learning and students as problem solvers, you want to be thinking about how are teachers supporting new ways of student learning. And teachers aren't the only ones who are, critical to this process. In our conversations, we just found real importance in making sure parents understand, and others in the community as well, but particularly parents, why is school changing? Why does it need to change in the first place? And why is this so essential for your students' future? And so how are you engaging parents and others in your community in this vision? And it starts from the very beginning when you're coming up with a new vision. We found lots and lots of examples of how different school systems engage their community members in the thinking about what is the vision, what is it that we want students to know and be able to do. But as I mentioned, that's just the start. As you set off to pursue that vision, how do you keep parents engaged and involved and informed about why school looks the way it does and why their students are learning in the way that they are? And we took this challenge really seriously. And my co-author and I developed some discussion guides. These are just 4-page, highly visual discussion guides, one for parents and one for students. And I'll tell you quickly about the value of feedback, something else that we emphasize in project-based learning. My co-author and I are kind of nerdy, and we thought, okay, parents are going to need to know a lot. We came up with a 30-page, text-heavy document telling them everything they need to know about why school is changing and trends in education. And we went to some focus groups of parents and shared that with them. And they said, whoa, way too much information here. We want some really great things to think about and some sparks for conversation. And students as well in their focus group told us, hey, how about some visuals? So we turned a very dense document into some visual prompts to get you thinking about how is education changing? How am I as a student preparing for success? How am I as a parent supporting my students? And importantly, I think we have these available in both English and Spanish and as free downloads. And here's the website that will allow you to download those. There should be another graphic here that I'm not seeing, but I'm going to keep going. So as you think about what I've been talking about today, if you're listening, I'm going to encourage you to reflect a little bit as a listener and think about these 3 whys. Why might a new vision of student success matter to me? Whatever role you're in, whether it's a student, an educator, a parent, potential partner, why might it matter for our school community? And why might it matter for the broader world? So I think those are some reflection prompts that are going to help you think about taking these ideas about how schools are changing and preparing for purposeful learning and connecting it to what we hope will be some action steps. So your next steps to really redefine student success. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm hoping that we're going to have some questions from Mariana and perhaps from Frank and others.
Wow.
Okay, I'm back. Now I see you all.
Well, that was amazing. So, Frank, if you have some questions, I have some questions.
Yeah, I've got 4 pages.
Yes. If you want to start it, Frank, you can start it. I will go next.
And so remind me, Mariana, how many minutes do we have yet before we get cut off?
I don't know. I'm not really sure.
I think about 10, Frank.
About 10? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I think the easiest way for me to do this, Suzie, is to simply kind of work my way backwards through some of my notes.
Okay.
And so your 4 whys, great. All focusing on the vision and carrying that out. So what do you say to those educators or those parents who say, wait a minute, the state guides the curriculum. The state tells us what we're supposed to be teaching. The kind of things you're talking about don't align with what we're supposed to be teaching. How do we, and who are we supposed to be serving? How do you reconcile those apparent conflicts?
Yeah, and part of it is they aren't insurmountable conflicts. I think as we look at state standards, state expectations, state assessments, the project that I'm describing develop deep understanding of exactly those bodies of knowledge that we want our students to understand. That citizen science project, those students understand ecosystems, how to design experiments, how to make an argument based on evidence. It's just that it's not divvied up into little chunks in the way that our students are often expected to learn these things. It's in one really comprehensive project, as well as the communication skills to get your ideas out in the world. These are embedded, and this is what our standards are all about. These are the big ideas of our curriculum. Can you make an argument based on evidence? Can you communicate that to different audiences? If you kind of sift through the multiple standards that our schools are held accountable to, those are some of your high priority standards. So I think in the schools that are moving in this direction, they aren't dismissing accountability expectations, but they are taking a hard look at how do we get there? How do we ensure that students develop the understanding they need and can apply it? Because this is like the value add. If they're only learning things to pass the test, they're going to quickly forget those things. We know that. We know that from, years of research show us this. But if they're learning things so that they can use them to solve a problem, that's when it's going to stick with them and they can draw on that information again. So there are some different ways to think about assessment that we're seeing some of these schools start to use. Portfolios are becoming ever more popular, where students are gathering evidence of their learning, and in many cases before they graduate or even move on from middle school to high school, they have to defend their abilities. They have to defend their work. So portfolio defenses, this is very accountable learning. So we're not dismissive of those learning standards. It's not that, if all of us had our wishes, there would be some changes in how we go about these things, right? I mean, there are definitely some barriers that teachers can say, oh, I can't do this because, or here's my yeah, but I think we show over and over again how teachers really are addressing these important learning goals through projects, through learning experiences that let kids really go deep in interconnected ways, not in siloed ways. So it's an ongoing conversation, but I think this is where having that big vision conversation and getting all your stakeholders to understand why this is going to be better for your students in the long run. Then you've got that community permission to go in this direction. And I'll share one quick story with you, Frank. One of the superintendents we spoke with was from a district in Georgia, I believe. And it was a district that, was a perennial high flyer on traditional assessments. Reading and math, they're just knocking it out of the park year after year. Until one day, this superintendent has a quick conversation with a student who had been an exchange student from Germany, and she spent a year in this high school. She was getting ready to go back, and she stopped by the superintendent's office to say, hey, thanks for letting me be a guest of the district for a year. Had a great time. I'm going back home. And he took a moment and said, well, tell me the difference between the education you had before you came here and what you experienced here. And she didn't hesitate at all. She said something like, oh, well, here they tell you the answers. You just have to remember them. In Germany, we were supposed to learn things so we could figure out the answers. And for this superintendent, that was a game changer. First, he got out a recorder and said, his phone, and said, could you say that again? I want to record this. And then he began sharing that insight with parent communities, with business partners, and saying, hey, what do we want? What do we want for our students? Do we want them to just regurgitate, or do we want them to be able to solve problems and think and apply? And, the consensus was pretty strong. We want to move in the direction of students as thinkers and problem solvers. So he met with, it's not a huge district, he met with every single teacher and said, let me tell you, if our state assessments drop, if the scores go down, that's on me. I want you to move with me in the direction of more authentic learning. That's the direction they took, kind of a research-based approach to authentic learning. And they provided tons of professional development. He lobbied for doubling professional learning time because he realized teachers needed to learn some new, they needed their toolkits to expand and to change if they were going to move in this direction. And what happened to the test scores? They're still great. And he said it's never been a conversation. Nobody ever brings that up anymore with him or says, hey, but what about test scores? It's all about what can our students do. So I think, there are those success stories I think we've got to hold on to and spread around, because I think they give leaders permission to be bolder, and they give teachers a model of what do I need from a leader if they're asking me to move in a different direction. Will they have my back? How do I know? How are they going to support me in this work? So I think those sorts of stories were pretty powerful for me to hear.
That's a great story. Really, seriously, I wish you could even say it again. But because I think a lot of school districts are frozen in fear. They're frozen that some higher power is going to come after them, and statewide testing brings a real cloud related to that. I work with many school districts. Once we develop the vision, we do a challenge like, who is in charge here, and can we do what we want to do? And I see consistently over and over and over again, statewide testing will not let us do this. The state will not let us do this, and you have to peel away that. So your superintendent came through and pushed that issue right away in one fell swoop.
Exactly.
That's
exactly. And it was, courageous, and I would say another thing that was in their favor was this is a superintendent who was sticking around. He wasn't there for 2 or 3 years and then moving on to a bigger district. He had history there, and he had staying power. So I think that was important.
So let me segue this question. Oh, by the way, I also comment that these examples you're giving are inherently interdisciplinary and cross-curricular, but so many of our standards are written for single curriculums. And projects sometimes start out by a teacher who's only certified to teach in one. And therefore making the bridge to embrace the others becomes a challenge, and maybe you could comment on that in a minute, but I've got to ask you the parent question.
Okay.
So in this district where they made this major change, or generalize it to all districts, parents are often perceived as one of those higher powers that restrict changes in the educational delivery. And it's because they were successful in the old model. Why shouldn't their kids be successful in the old model.
Yeah.
So there's a first question for you. But then the second question related to that is, what should we expect of our parents in an active way? How deeply should they be participants in projects? Not to do the projects, but to be. How can they be supportive? Because so many parents don't understand this.
Yeah.
And what we know is when parents don't understand school, they recede, they step back, and they don't get into the fray, and that hurts kids. So what do you do about that?
Yeah, yeah. So, we again, districts that are making these transitions, they've got to get their parents as allies. As you're saying, either parents then will recede, or, they become confrontational, and don't want school to change, and can be quite vocal. We've been seeing in the US some very unpleasant things happening in our school board meetings as, parents don't like what they see, and, trouble ensues. So parent engagement in the very beginning, and as that vision unfolds, the visioning process happens, but then it's got to stay alive. It's got to stay alive and well. As new parents come in the system, as kids get older, we found, all kinds of ways that school systems were clever and creative about bringing parents in a way that was non-confrontational. Often by talking about what are your hopes and dreams for your students. What a lovely invitation for parents to, they always say, well, I want them to be happy, right? They don't say, I want them to have the greatest test scores in the world. They start, I was reminded of this by a school system, very high poverty district, largely farm worker families, migrating from Mexico. This is in the California Central Valley. And this district had perennially been at the bottom of the barrel on test scores. They just were the worst performer. And they hit a point where the leadership just said, well, we can keep what we're doing and stay stuck in this place of failure, or we can just scrap everything and start over. If we start over, we've got to find out what our families want. So they had probably 100 convenings around the community in English and in Spanish, with food and childcare. They took away all the barriers for participation, transportation. And the overwhelming message was, make our kids' lives better than ours. We want our kids to have a bright future. So that's a really positive starting point for a vision and for the programs that, this district, Lindsay, California, is now a leader in personalized learning. Everybody in the system, whether you're a child, whether you're a custodian, whether you're a teacher, everybody's a lifelong learner, and they have their own pipeline for growing local talent, producing their own teachers who understand how to teach and learn in a system of personalized learning. So there are great examples, but I think they reminded me, start with kind of the heart. Parents have this care for their students. And if we start there, instead of comparing, test scores and college admission rates and, AP scores and all of that, if we start with what do you really want for your kids? And then the students themselves can be amazing advocates. Mariana, I'm sure you can advocate for the kind of education that you want after, 12 years of school and, getting ready to head into your bright future. And we heard from some districts where a little pushback from parents. Maybe parents were okay at the elementary grades with things like standards-based assessments, different kinds of report cards that focused on growth rather than scores. Elementary, that was great. You hit high school and parents went crazy. Like, what are these report cards all about? How could this possibly help our students get into the college? Well, why are you changing the game? So they had parent forums led by students. They had student panelists lead the discussion. And the kids came up with these great metaphors. And they asked parents things like, okay, you're getting on a plane. Do you want a pilot who has scored on paper tremendously on all of the scores for what it takes to be a pilot? Or do you want a pilot who has taken X number of hours in the air, all kinds of different, and of course they want the pilot with experience, and proficiency and demonstrations of that. But they came up with multiple ways to get their parents thinking about, why is it we need to be able to show what we know and can do, and why are test scores perhaps not the only way to measure that, not the best way to show that. So there's a lot of creativity out there. These are real problems, but I think what we found from many of our interviews was that school systems are finding ways, and not just in the U.S. We had conversations around the globe, and bringing communities together to really focus on what is it we want for our kids and how are we going to get there. There's just no better starting point, I think.
Great. What a great story. What a fantastic story. I'm going to just jump to one other thing. And I think we only have a minute or two, but I love your title, Citizen Scientists, okay. Which to me is, that was from the middle school example. And for me, that is a very critical name shift because it takes that study area away from, oh, yes, we are students, to, oh, we are doing something. We are scientists. We are scientists. And so what's interesting about your story on the polluted lake, I'm going to tell you our story. And this is at our Gimnasia Los Cabos in Chia, outside of Bogota, which you will be at for our Congress. Students, there's a river that goes through there and it was polluted. And our citizen scientists, our student citizen scientists, researched why that was. And they discovered that the pollution was largely from a very large company that was dumping wastes into it. And then as they peeled that away, they understood that that company was an employer of many in the community. So the scientific issue became a civic and social and political issue. The scientists then quickly had to become citizen governmental leaders or government.
Absolutely. Yeah. Policymakers. Yeah. Yeah.
So the project switched from one focus to another focus, which often happens. And in this case, happen in an appropriate way. So when you do come and join us at Gimnasia Los Cabos in Chias, you ask the question, how did that project turn out?
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, I look forward to it.
It's the same story. And that story's in Colombia. Your stories are from USA and from other parts of the world. This is the same. When students are doing something, the purpose there is power, and they can make ripples in their community with their parents that they can never do if they are student learners.
Absolutely. And they see themselves differently, I think, as I bet Mariana might be able to tell us about that, you stand a little taller when you've done a project like that. You're capable. And that sticks with you. Yeah.
How are we doing, Mariana?
Well, I am doing great. This is fascinating. I have never been in a talk like this. Because for me, for being a student, I am out, I see my teacher working and they put me a project and I just made the project without thinking really what I am doing. But it's weird, then now I'm sitting here and I am thinking all the projects I have done are for this. Now I'm connecting the things this is for this and I can work with this. But I have just a question that I have been seeing. And it's, for example, we divided, right, to junior, middle, and high school. But I am from high school, and I can see that some people or some students, some classmates for me, they are not so happy with the project. They just see a grade and not an experience of life. How you can approach to them, For example, I am excited. I love to do projects. I have always loved, but there are some classmates that do not love to do projects. So for you, how you can approach to them, to these people that do not have these.
Sure. I mean, I have some ideas and I bet Frank does as well, but, I encourage, especially as students get older and, you're more capable, you've been through projects before, you can do things, you know how to work together, asking students to identify problems they want to solve. So they've got an investment. What do you care about? And if they say, oh, I don't know, whatever I'm assigned, that's a reason to pause and go a little deeper, because I think students, one of these capacities of people who are prepared for the future is to be able to recognize what is a problem to tackle, what's worth solving and how do I find that out? If I don't know, what do I need to do? So maybe some experiences that open their eyes or surveys of student interests. And then your artful teachers can design projects that connect to those interests. And then students are going to find, I hope, more reason to engage with them. So if it feels like, I've got a voice in the design of this project, we're actually doing something I suggested. So I find some teachers being really creative. They'll have a big, graffiti wall in their classroom. What are things we care about? And, kids can just write ideas, and you've got to have the right culture so that they're writing appropriate things. But that can become the springboard for really great projects. And then teachers or students can see, oh, I had that idea, and look what we're doing in this project. I see the connection between something I'm interested in and care about and, what we actually get to do. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, more voice, I think. The more voice, the better.
I think your response, Suzie, is perfect and spot on. However, I think that there may be a deeper issue in Mariana's comment, and it has to do with the culture, the climate, the expectations that students have of their learning. And I'm going to give you two little stories here. Mm-hmm. So I worked in a high-flying district outside of Boston about 3 years ago, and we were exploring project-based learning, and yes, the educators said they wanted it, and then one of them said, well, you know what would happen in this district? Students would find out which solutions to the project scored the highest last year, and then they would copy them.
Oh, wow.
And that comes out of a belief, a culture in the school, in the district, that there was one right answer, mm-hmm. and that scoring high was the most important part of school. Yeah. And so I'll parallel that with another district that I worked in, that after doing visioning, they realized that they had unintentionally and for good other reasons created a culture that was completely fixated on high statewide or ministry test scores. Mm-hmm. Students testified that they were petrified, that they were afraid to do anything other than what they believed was going to get them to the one right answer. And so what came out of that was the really deep work that district had to do, and kudos to them. They are proceeding in this manner. They are unraveling, they are deconstructing their district climate, culture, and attitudes, and they are doing it with students, with educators, and with parents. Yeah. And they're really addressing that question of, what do high test scores mean? Who are they good for? Does it really make a difference getting into university? And how does it petrify our students? Yeah. And until they do that work, they will always have students with the attitude that Mariana just expressed, mm-hmm. which is, I'm uncomfortable with this. On project-based learning, I'm uncomfortable with this. I haven't done it in the past. I'm afraid I'm not going to be successful. I don't want to do it. Tell me the answer.
Yeah.
And I think you can just address that with that student only. Unless
culture change. Yeah.
Unless it is such an absolutely engaging and highly personalized issue to be addressing, that you can also confirm meet state ministry standards. Yeah. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. So it's a tough one, but it is perhaps one of the most basic issues that we all have everywhere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the more, another piece of this puzzle, I think, is connecting schools with potential partners outside of school. And the more examples we heard of how these partnerships were brokered, and how, experts from different fields could contribute to student projects, be part of it, maybe not for the whole thing, but for a really key part of it, that opens both teachers and students' eyes to who are these people in different fields? What are they looking for? And again, teachers will be amazed to hear a professional say, we're not looking for kids who know everything there is to know about our field. We want people who are can work together, who can continue learning. We can train them on the content. We can't train them on those kind of soft skills or 21st century skills. They need to arrive with those. They need to be people who are persistent and don't get flummoxed the first time they run into a challenge or don't know the right answer. Because we don't start with right answers in our work. We have to investigate and think critically. That's what we want. And I think the more that's another silo I think we've got to break, is the school is over here and the rest of the world's over here. And the more students get to interact and teachers get to interact as well with those professions that, you know, are going to open their eyes about, you know, this is the world we're heading to. How are we going to be part of this? How do we want to contribute to this? It is a huge culture shift, especially for districts that have traditionally done really well, or individual schools that have been, you know, consistently churning out those high scores and getting those college admissions to all the top tier schools. They don't want to lose any of their success. If you redefine success, they then have to think about, how are we going to be successful in this new way? And that's a challenge, you know, that's a big challenge. But I think it's one we just have to take. We're just at a moment where it's got to happen.
But also the research tells us that when students are doing project-based learning and doing it well, I don't mean the students are doing well in it. I mean the projects are well written and well challenged. They will actually do better on state and administrative scores. Right.
And for schools that haven't done it, that requires a leap of faith. So the more and more evidence we can share with them, you know, the Lucas Foundation is doing a great job of rolling out one white paper after another about the benefits of project-based learning in different domains and at different age levels. But as you're saying, they have to be projects that are well done. They can't just be little activities that get called, you know, projects. It's got to be the deep dive into understanding and prototyping and, you know, improving your work and sharing it. All those things have to happen.
And that's the ongoing learning part. Everybody's a learner, not just.
That's it.
Yes, and I can prove that. My school do a lot of projects. And for example, like you say, you need to tell a little bit more personal when you're growing up. And I do my projects personal, like for fashion design, because I want to study that. And that gives me an opportunity to have a portfolio and to send it to, I don't know, to university, and I have a scholarship for a summer course that I did. And that helped me a lot, because then I found out I don't want to study fashion design.
Fantastic. Fantastic
So
story, right? Yeah, but you went through that whole process. You kind of put your a good view of yourself. You could show, here's what you know, my portfolio is evidence of kind of who I am and what I can do. And sometimes finding out sooner what you don't want to do is also really helpful.
Yes, that is good. I find it like just in time.
Perfect. Yeah.
But yeah, so Frank, you have another question for.
What are we doing on time here? We may be at the end of our. We're past your time probably.
Just finish.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that earlier, in very beginning, Suzie was talking about a green light culture, and she used the word, we need to have wide angle lenses. We need to see the whole territory. And I thought that was a wonderful image of and maybe, yes, it relies on old technology and people don't understand what that is anymore. But I was thinking about how many schools have unintentionally adopted narrow angle lenses.
Yeah.
Because the tendency with separate curriculum areas and separate certifications is to get narrower and narrower. The tendency of having departmental meetings that only focus on curriculum content, but not interdepartmental meetings where teachers can talk, where teachers actually share the same students and can therefore talk about student learning. Departmental meetings focus on curriculum content, get narrower and narrower and narrower. And yes, it's all good work, but it is narrow. And so what you're talking about on your green light culture is a flipping upside down of the range of overview that many schools have adopted. And for that, that's a big work. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And some teachers get nervous about interdisciplinary challenges because they know one discipline really well. They don't know the other disciplines. So they need to be comfortable enough to collaborate with other teachers and have systems in place that allow for that to happen. You know, I was just working with a bunch of international schools on thinking about interdisciplinary projects and what are some ways to think differently about designing them. And I think the one way most of us understand interdisciplinary learning is it has to be all in. You've got to have both content areas, same teachers, same students all the time. But that's just one model. I talked with them about what I call the just-in-time disciplinary engagement, where an example might be a chemistry teacher who's doing a really great project on water quality, which we've been talking about. You come to a point where you need understanding of statistics in order to evaluate the data. Now you bring in your math experts, your statistics experts, just in time to meet that learning goal. So it doesn't have to be a statistics and science project all the way through, but at a just-in-time moment, you can broker those relationships and bring in the disciplinary thinking that's necessary to keep going. Or at the end, if students want to take their, provide evidence of learning, their final product, that can really stretch some teachers beyond their comfort level. If kids come up with ideas for products that they don't know anything about. I was thinking of a history teacher who had students participate in a really wonderful competition called National History Day, really well-structured project-based learning. First, they really developed their disciplinary lenses, thinking as historians, choosing a time in history. This particular contest focused on World War II, so they had to find a really interesting aspect of that to delve into and, analyze as historians. And then they had a choice of different ways to demonstrate that, to share that with audiences. And one group of girls wanted to do a one-act play. Now, here's your history teacher. He knows nothing about theater. He knows nothing about stagecraft. So for the end of the project, he connected them with a theater person. So again, it's interdisciplinary thinking. They couldn't have done a great job if they didn't understand a lot about theater and staging and all of that, costuming. But that wasn't his, deep understanding. He needed somebody else's support for that. So thinking about when in a project you want to lean into interdisciplinary ways of thinking or make those connections. For some teachers, that can be a start. They don't have to have all in, all same students, blended, block schedules, all those things. It can be barriers, or it can be, we can't do that because, but you can think about at key times in the project, when do we need to think in a different way, think in the way that a different expert thinks, and how do I open that world up to my students? That can be a start, and that gives students those connections, and they start to see the world, through these wider lenses, I think.
Yeah. And in some high schools, which are departmentally based and do not have a strong culture of interdepartmental communication, those teachers may not even know who the theater teacher is, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Who would I talk to? Yeah. How would I find out? Yeah, right. And they can shut down. Yeah.
Before we wrap, can you, I'm going to make a comment, and I'd like you to piggyback on it. At the very, very beginning, you established the concept of creating a vision and creating it with a sense of equity for all students, not just the high achieving, et cetera. But my experience is that quite often with project-based learning, students that we don't think of as being the high achievers often rise and become high achievers. And I believe it's because they've had an opportunity to do their learning and to express it in different ways than the traditional. Have you found that to be common, that the average student becomes a high achieving student in these contexts?
Yeah, anecdotally for sure. I can't point to any research yet that shows that to be true, although some of the research coming out from the Lucas Foundation and others really does show that the equity advantage of project-based learning, that, for example, students taking AP courses in science, it's a broader group of students who are signing up for those courses because they're project-based. They see how they could be successful in this context, whereas before they might have thought, I'm not AP material. But now they're taking more challenging courses because they're being offered in a way that students can see, you know, I could be successful here. I've heard from my buddies about this class and the cool things they got to do, and I'd like to do that too. But over again, anecdotally, we hear teachers talk about, and students themselves talk about, kind of like, as I said, standing a little taller, or kind of stepping into their own sense of, I can do this, I can do something about this issue. And I think that's really profound. And I think that's the kind of thing that for teachers who have been nervous, resistant, whatever, those are the game-changing moments, because they see how, you know, they've gone into education for the benefit of students. You know, most teachers are in it for the good work. And when they see their students, you know, really able to reach those moments of excellence, you know, I think that's pretty compelling. My optimism coming through, Frank.
Well, yeah, but it's justifiable optimism.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I think so.
Well, this was amazing. Thank you very much for your participation and for the presentation, Suzie, and for the question, Franz. I think this make everything more clear, and we can finish this conference, this beautiful conference that was just a way to learn new stuff about the students and planning of learning. So yes.
Well, thank you for your hosting of us, Mariana, and best wishes to you and your bright future that's ahead of you.
Thank you.
And for everybody, Suzie Boss will be with us in Cartagena and then in Bogota in the last week of April, and for our Revolution Education Congress #3. And there are ways for people to find out, but Mariana, I actually don't know how they can find out about them. Do you know how to give the advertorial for how they get to those conferences?
Yes, I'm very sure you can follow those first in YouTube, and second one also in Instagram. I think they will be sharing all the information over there and also in the page. So you can find it in our profile. And thank you very much. I think we can finish this.
Okay. Thank you so much. Great
Thank
to see you
Steve.
both. Thanks, Frank, for your questions.
Yes.
Juan, creo que ya podemos terminar.